tonight on the Michigan Experience.
One of the critical factors was that in 1790, which is 3 years after the Philadelphia Convention, the slave populations of the southern states, southern colonies, ranged from 25% to almost 40%. So even at that point, in 1787, there was a significant disparity in terms of the role that slaves played, just in terms of population density. As late as 1787, slavery was supported in the South, not as a positive institution as it was later argued in the 19th century, but as a necessary evil. We've got slaves, and we can't figure out what we're going to do without them. In 1790, 3 years after the Constitutional Convention, only Maine and New Hampshire were the only states that had no slaves. New York and New Jersey continued to support slavery well after all the other northern states. So at the time of the Constitutional Convention, the alignment of colonies came to that convention with very different imperatives about slavery. And the other factor that I think is very important, that even in the 18th century, for 18th century abolitionists, not one of the leaders and very few of those who were just in the general population conceived of integration in our modern sense, and no one could conceive of a biracial society. And as a matter of fact, the abolitionists of the era thought of emancipation as necessitating the deportation of African ancestry slaves to the Caribbean or to Africa, like the British had done with Sierra Leone, or to the Far West. And the other problem with the abolitionists ran into was everyone agreed that those who owned slaves had to be compensated for them. That no one could conceive that they could be deprived of the value without being compensated. And just to put it in terms that will help you understand what the delegates to the Constitutional Convention faced, the budget in 1790 for all of the United States was $7 million. Using a reasonable estimate of the value per slave based on the 1790 census figures, it would have cost somewhere in the vicinity of $140 million to compensate slaveholders for the value of their slaves. So in 1787, the people at the Constitutional Convention faced one, what do we do if we insist, assuming that there was a complete universal will among those delegates that emancipation was appropriate at that point, and that was not true. But assuming that, no one had an idea as to how to accomplish this. And as a result of that, the issue of slavery was largely ducked in the actual Constitution. The word slavery never appears anywhere in the document, and its shadow is cast in a couple of provisions in Section 1, the foremost of which is Article 1, Section 9. And that is the provision that the Congress, the delegates to the Constitutional Congress agreed to allow the importations of persons until 1808, essentially 2 decades. The persons referenced are slaves. In that provision, the Southern delegations to the convention got if not an explicit acknowledgement of the right to continue slavery, they got the right to continue to import slaves. And that was psychologically important to the Southern delegates. The Northern delegates, on the other hand, by putting an endpoint on the importation of slaves, hoped that that would signal the gradual elimination of slavery. And they got, in turn, no explicit recognition that slavery was entitled to continue.